Anyone else want a conversation? Welcome. Yeah. Hi, I'm Ed.
What?
Ed.
Ed.
Yeah.
Bradley.
Nice to meet you, Bradley. Please take a seat. Are we still good to go? So Bradley, I'm here at Brown University, and I have a tablecloth that says, "Can you justify not being vegan?" And so I was wondering, what justifications can you think of, or do you use that justify not being vegan?
Well, okay, so I think it's any argument you put for the morality of any action.
Yeah.
There's basically nothing that you can say that you can't poke some sort of hole in. So I would be interested to hear, what would your positive argument be for why eating meat or drinking milk or eating eggs is wrong?
I think it comes down to an issue of necessity. And so in times of necessity, we can justify an action that could cause harm to someone else. And so let's take an example of a human situation. And so there was a plane crash in the Andes, I think in the 1970s. And the survivors of the plane crash survived and lived to tell the tale because they cannibalized on the dead flesh, or the flesh of the other dead passengers.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, we'd argue that cannibalism became a morally justifiable act. And so likewise, if we had to consume an animal product to live, that could become a morally justifiable act. But in a contemporary society, especially in the US, where we have an abundance of alternatives, where we can get all the protein, calcium, iron that we need from plants, it then becomes that there is a lack of necessity. And therefore, a lack of necessity means that it's impossible to morally justify the action because the action contains a victim. And so there's the ethical side of it, the moral consideration to animals. There's also the environmental aspect and the fact that raising and consuming animals is devastating for our environment in so many different ways. And so that's why I've pose this question, because I believe that the logical and moral emphasis lies on the side of vegan, but I think that most of us go through life without ever having to justify not being vegan. And because we've never justified it, we've never thought about it or be held accountable for those decisions.
Okay. So I understand your argument. So one way that I would justify it, I think, is if you look at where should our morality actually come from? And so you're basing your argument on the fact that animals can even be victims. So one possible argument you can say is that the basis for morality itself is that you need morality to create a system in which rational beings can live together, right? So moral laws should be something that make life in our society better for everyone, right? So so this is kind of a lot of this argument is not my own thought. So I read a paper by Peter Carruthers, and the argument there is there's this idea of moral contractualism. So basically, it's this hypothetical agreement that moral agents agree to morality in a system where morality should benefit other moral agents. So it's you gain something by living in a society where everyone agrees, because most of us understand that there is this concept of morality.
Yes.
We should treat those people better. But since animals have no ability to act morally, then there's no real incentive for humans to treat animals better.
But if we take, so let's take an example of rats. Only unfortunately because they've been studied the most in terms of many tests. And so one of the things that they've seen in animal testing for rats is that rats will share food. They will actually deny themselves a treat if it means not harming another rat. So, if they could shock a rat and they would get a treat for that, but they recognize the other rat was in pain through the action, and so they refuse the treat to not harm the other rats. And so we would define that as being a moral action. And so I think that part of the issue when you look at this is we apply a very human-centric idea to what being moral means, but actually the foundations of being moral do exist within certain species of animals as well. And so I think, and I guess one point I was going to make beforehand was, what is it about humans, what is it about our existence that means that we deserve moral consideration?
Well, the fact is we can actually think about the morality. So if a rat's being compassionate, it's being compassionate because it's psychologically painful. Even if I say it's not morally bad to harm animals, I'll still admit, like, if I were to kick a dog, that would hurt me, you know? Like, I don't like seeing other things in pain.
Yes.
So, it's that same kind of reaction for rats, but the difference for humans is that we can actually think about it. We can actually think about, okay, you know, if I harm another human, right? Not only is that painful for me to watch another human be in pain,
Yes.
but you know, that also has other consequences on that human's life, and I can think about a larger, you know, rational picture of morality beyond just, you know, the immediate compassion of, oh, someone else is in pain, I don't like that, you know, that's painful for me too.
But even at the same time, what we see from animals like the rat example is that they can display complex emotions such as guilt. And now guilt's a complex emotion. And so I think it's unfair for us not to grant some element of benefit of the doubt to these animals. And it's the purpose of this conversation really would be to define whether or not the suffering of an animal is something that we should be morally considerate of. And it's not. I think we can sometimes get bogged down within whether or not non-human animals have the same cognitive or emotional capacities as humans. I find that almost to be irrelevant, as it's the purpose of why I'm vegan is because we can isolate the things that matter to us most, an experience of happiness, an experience of joy, but also a reduction as far as possible of the experience of suffering and pain is kind of what drives us. And so those intrinsic values or emotions or feelings are also the same in non-human animals as well. And should the fact that they can suffer and can experience happiness, does that not mean that we should grant them the right to their own autonomy to experience these things in a way that is devoid of human exploitation?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as saying that we should grant them the right. I think it is better when animals